The Washington Commanders have no defensive ends under contract beyond this season. And that is a problem that has to be addressed in the upcoming NFL draft. We're diving into that right now on Locked On Commanders.
Your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to Commanders fans of the Locked On Commanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. Please subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you always get the latest episodes when they drop. I'm David Harrison, credential member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for Commander Country, a part of Sports Illustrated's FanNation. You can find me there, here, or on Twitter at dharrison82, or text me anytime via Subtext at 202-760-2644. The Subtext group is growing on a daily basis. I can't appreciate all of you enough that have taken part in that initiative. It's been a lot of fun texting you all and getting to know the Commanders fan base just a little bit better. And I want to thank everybody out there for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or your first view today and every day. Everydayers, those of you who are coming through 5 days a week, whether it's on YouTube, whether it's via audio, again, I appreciate you as well. And that group is growing. When you reach out, guys, email, Twitter, subtext, whatever it is, make sure you're letting me know who the everydayers are so I can thank you for being here with me 5 days a week. And if you've been here 5 days a week, then you have heard me talk about Chase Young. We have had some exchanged emails, Twitter notes, DMs, comments, all of it about this conversation all off season long. And finally, we have at least some sort of resolution. Nikki Javala of the Washington Post reporting on Wednesday afternoon that the Washington Commanders are declining Chase Young's fifth-year option, deciding not to pick up the option on the 2020 NFL Draft's number 2 overall pick. This means that Chase Young's time with the Commanders is coming to an end. That's not true. That's not actually what it means, guys. It only means that his fifth-year option has not been picked up. What that means is Chase Young will become an unrestricted free agent after this 2023 NFL season. Now, here's the thing about that. Along with Chase Young, so will Montez Sweat. So will James Smith-Williams. So will Casey Toohill, F.A. Obata, Abdullah Anderson, William Bradley King, and Benning Potoa'e, the only defensive end in Washington. So my hold open was technically not completely accurate because Shaka Toney is not going to be an unrestricted free agent next year. But we don't know right now if Shaka Toney is even going to be eligible to play in the National Football League next year. Shaka Toney, one of the players recently suspended by the NFL for violating the NFL's gambling policy. So he got an indefinite suspension, but it is at least 1 full year. So we'll see what the NFL decides to do. We'll see what the Washington Commanders decide to do. They could very well just release him for this violation or for any other number of reasons, to be quite honest with you. So as of right now, you basically can't count on any defensive end that is on this roster being on the roster in 2024. And that's a complete problem in my eyes. Now, let's not catastrophize here, right? Let's not get too deep into this deep end here. If we're being realistic, about 4 of these guys are really kind of easily retainable, relatively speaking, meaning, their contracts aren't going to be massive and bank breakers and all that. And, when you look at guys like James Smith-Williams, Casey Toohill even, they have played well when the Washington Commanders have needed them to. But the flip side of that is that none of them are really clear and present dangers as far as defensive ends go in the National Football League today. Offensive linemen don't come into the games really kind of shaking in their cleats when they see one of these guys lined up across from them. And we've seen it all off season long. There are Commanders fans who think that Chase Young is an outright bust and they want him gone yesterday. There are Commanders fans who think that Montez Sweat is overrated from a local aspect. I mean, nationally, I don't think anybody's giving Montez Sweat, Nick Bosa, Joey Bosa levels of love. But locally, there are some Montez Sweat supporters and there are Montez Sweat detractors who think that really his production is because he's playing next to Daron Payne and Jonathan Allen. And I don't think I've seen one comment, tweet, email, article, anything saying that both of these guys, Chase Young and Montez Sweat, are both top-tier NFL defensive ends. But I have seen comments, tweets, emails, articles saying that both of these guys should probably move on from the Washington Commanders. So bottom line is the Washington Commanders don't have a clear-cut top-tier defensive end, and that is a problem when you are a team that lives and dies off the pass rush from your defensive end. Defense tackles do great, and that is amazing, but if you really want to affect opposing pass games, especially as we get more and more mobile at the quarterback position, you have to be able to affect the game from the edge position. So if they don't have a clear-cut top edge, They have to absolutely address this in the NFL draft because you can't wait till next year. You can't wait till next season when Chase Young and Montez Sweat, even if they ball out, they don't have to necessarily resign, guys. Remember, a franchise tag on one of these two guys next year estimates to be over $24 million. Now, I'm not saying that's a completely prohibitive number, but it's a fairly prohibitive number. So I'm not saying I would go day one because you do still have Montez Sweat and Chase Young, James Smith-Williams, et cetera, this season. So as far as immediate needs, no, you don't have to necessarily go defensive end. Now, if they trade Chase Young, which there is some speculation already brewing that basically this information leaked out, quote unquote, because they're trying to drum up the interest, or maybe his agent leaked it out trying to drum up some trade interest ahead of the NFL draft. But when you're looking at the next season and even beyond into the future of the Washington Commanders, you can't simply bank on having one of these guys, having them secured beyond this season until you actually have them secured beyond the season via an extension or some other mechanism. I mean, basically just an extension because, again, that franchise tag number next year for the defensive ends is $24 million. So if you come out here with Chase Young, Montez Sweat, both on contract years, say one or both of them balls out, they could also both decide, you know what, you didn't want to re-sign us before we were doing great. Why would we re-sign with you now that we are doing great? Now, typically players, if they ball out, you kind of saw it with Daron Payne, they kind of want to stay in the environment that helped them ball out in the first place as long as they're getting paid. So that's not a huge, problem. And I think that Montez Sweat specifically, if he does ball out and the Commanders come back through like they did with Daron Payne this year, say, okay, hey, now let's pay you. I think he'll be open to a deal. But there is an existence here where both of these guys or one of these guys, the one that you want to resign, basically says, nah, man, like you didn't want to resign me before. I'm going to go find my money elsewhere. And then you're left with either franchise tagging them at a fully guaranteed $24 million plus dollars, which is fully hit on your salary cap, not negotiable. You can't kick any of that down the road. That's all coming to do. And then in 2025, you got the exact same problem, and you're certainly not going to franchise tag a guy again for now, $32 million plus, right? So you have that problem. But who is the right defensive end and where's the right round for Washington to do this? That's really the question that we've now got to address. And we're going to dive into who those best options are on each of the first three rounds. Because, again, I think it's got to be in the top 100 picks with Nick Baumgardner of The Athletic. That is coming up right now next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And that conversation, this episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. You've heard me talking about this mobile game. And if you've ever thought you could be the perfect Ultimate Football GM, you've got to give this game a try. It's not as easy as you might think it is, so you're definitely going to enjoy the challenge. When you play Ultimate Football GM, you control every aspect of your organization, from the coaches to the doctors to the scouts to the players. You start with the worst roster in football and the number one pick in the upcoming draft, and you make your decisions the way you want to make them. All of this is going down in a realistic and challenging game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline. Play as you go, play as you want, play anywhere you want to. Locked On Commanders listeners, you get a 100% free boost to your franchise when you use a promo code Locked On in all caps in the game store. That's Locked On in all caps. Make sure you check it out today. Download the game. Just go to ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the App Store. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listener, your first view today and every day. Every dayers out there, make sure you're here all draft weekend, not just with me, but join Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino and other Locked On NFL experts and the Locked On NFL Scouting YouTube page for live NFL draft coverage presented by Ultimate Football GM. Kyle and Joe will be going live for all of rounds 1, 2, and 3. And then on Saturday, they'll get you caught up after each round. Join the draft dudes for the first round tonight, Thursday night, live on YouTube on the Locked On NFL Scouting page starting at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. A link to that stream is in this show's description block, so you can check that out. Back-to-back episodes here on Locked On Commanders, joined by The Athletic. And today it's senior writer at The Athletic, Nick Baumgardner, on Twitter, at Nick Baumgardner. YouTube audience, you can see his Twitter at. So if you're one of the few people not already following him on Twitter, make sure you do so after this. Here with Nick today, we're going to talk NFL draft. So yesterday, Ben Standig, Commanders beat reporter, got a little bit of insight into the 20-year history or so that Ben has been around this franchise. But let's talk about the draft kind of from a top-down view. Before we get to the draft-specific news, Nick, obviously we got to talk Chase Young, the 2020 number 2 overall pick out of Ohio State, reportedly having his 5th year declined. Has not been confirmed at the time of this recording by the team, but Nikki Javala of the Washington Post, one of the best, one of the most professional. She's not putting stuff out via sources unless it's a legitimate source. Like this isn't some dude at McDonald's behind her in line who said, "Hey, I don't think they're going to pick up the option." And she's not just, she's not the only one doing it either. But Nick, let me ask you first, go back to 2020. What did you expect from Chase Young coming out of Ohio State? I know the injury is obviously significant. 15-month or so recovery process is massive. But just from the sample size that we did get a performance so far, has he lived up to your expectations?
I mean, no, not really, because like it's hard to say because it just we haven't gotten enough. And that's why it's a brutal situation here because we just haven't had enough. You know what I mean? Like I remember watching him and I'm here in Michigan. I watched him thoroughly at Ohio State and he was awesome. I mean, he was, he wasn't where the Bosa's were coming out because I think that he still had some more work to do, but as an athlete, so it sucks, that it's working out this way, but it's also, if you're Washington, you understand we're like, man, that's a big deal. Like that's a big contract. Like if you're comping it to like what Detroit's gonna have to deal with like Aiden Hutchinson in a couple years, it's a lot of money. So you got to be sure, man, but it's hard. That's a hard one but yeah, you just haven't had enough data right in the NFL yet.
Yeah, that's certainly fair. And I think now, obviously, this decision, or, again, not official decision by the team just yet, but this reported decision is going to play into what it means for Thursday. But so is the fact that now Chase Young and Montez Sweat both have expiring contracts after this season.
Right.
In fact, the entire defensive end room for the Washington Commanders is playing on expiring contracts, I guess, except for they have a suspended defensive end due to gambling. So I guess that year of service wouldn't count. But essentially, they have no defensive ends on the roster for 2024. So this news and the opportunity to secure a potential starting caliber defensive end for 2024, what does it mean for the NFL draft? Do you think a team in that situation with no locked-in defensive ends has to have edge as their top need now?
I think it should be one of their top one. I think it should be up there. And I don't think I would do anything crazy or panic or not take a guy that I would, like it's interesting because the guys that are going to be there where they pick are all guys that are sort of like eye of the beholder guys, like a Miles Murphy. Some people really like him a lot. Some people don't so much. They think he's got a lot of work to do. Van Ness from Iowa is very similar, right? Like a lot of people think he could be one of the best defenders in the draft, but like a lot of people are, well, how long is it going to take? And so if you just went through a situation where, Chase is, what happened. You're trying to move forward with everything else. You're changing some things up on offense right now. I would do it if you like the guy, but I also wouldn't panic because Washington's in a really interesting spot. They could do so many things. And I think a lot of things would help them, so interesting spot.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's look at some of the prospects then. I mean, you kind of mentioned Miles Murphy, but who's a day one guy at number 16? Is it Miles Murphy? Is there another guy as well that maybe you think could kind of be that day one option if they decide to address this position at the very top?
Yeah, I do wonder, Van Ness is the one that I almost think you're going to have to move up for if you're sitting where they're at. But like if he were to fall, and I know a lot of people have asked, like, is he going to fall into the 20s? And my answer to that is like, there's no way. Like, I do not see it happening. And I think that, Nolan Smith is the other one, but he's a very different player than Chase Young. Yeah. And he's like, but it's also like, they're at an interesting spot. Like, are you changing the way you play? I mean, you just hired Bieniemy. Like a lot of things could be sort of in play here. So I think Nolan Smith would be great value. I think Murphy would be a nice player there. And Van Ness. I think all those guys would be quality ads and probably to a point where I would almost say, if you're not going to take a quarterback, I'd wait on everything else and just focus on that. Try to get the best edge you can, really. I mean, at this point.
Now, Martin Mayhew, the general manager for the Commanders, made an interesting statement, kind of comment during his pre-draft press conference where he said, last year, when you look at the trade back they had from number 11 to number 16, they say, and it's at the disclosure of the team on what was real and what wasn't, but they claim that they came into night one with the plan of hopefully having a good amount of receivers left on the board at the top of most people's list so they could move back but still get Jahan, who they had as their number one receiver on their list. And that kind of run that they kind of predicted on the receivers but left Jahan Dotson on the board for them really helped them do that. Now, he kind of alluded that there could be another run on a specific position, wouldn't say which position because he's a smart NFL GM for at least for the most part. What do you think that there's been some speculation on the outside here? Like, what could that position run be? Because you would assume it's a position they may not necessarily need themselves. Where do you think, like 15 to 20, kind of what's a position group that you think you're going to run there in that area of the first round?
So that's really interesting. I think it's tight end. I think is maybe what he's thinking about there because there's so many good ones. And it's like, And there's a lot of teams in the 20s, Dallas, the Giants, the Chargers, that could all use, and maybe even you'd argue need a really good tight end. And Michael Mayer, Kincaid, Musgrave, Darnell Washington, all of those guys are, at least fringe first round grades. Kincaid and Mayer are no doubters. I would say Musgrave and Darnell are probably right on the fringe there, but doable. If you did it, it wouldn't shock me. Like 4 could absolutely go in the first round. So that is really what. And the other one though would be, possibly receiver, because I think the Washington is in a spot if they want to do that, because I don't think there's going to be any gone in the top 15. I think we're going to wait at least till then. So I think they've been a little overvalued by folks nationally throughout this whole process. So I think we're going to wait. Well, I could be wrong, but I guess that's one where I look at them too and say, like, hey, if you could move back or take one of those guys if you want, but that's one where I think that they could be in another interesting spot right there in the middle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think of receivers is the position that maybe there's a run going on there in the mid-teens and early 20s. That's absolutely somewhere I think Washington could be able to strike gold. Now, let's say they don't go edge in the first round. There's been some offensive line talk, some corner talk, and I want to talk corners here in just a little bit as well. But let's kind of stick with the edge just for now and wrap that up. If we don't see an edge rusher taken round 1, I mean, you look at the contract, and I just said this in my first segment. I can't see how the Commanders don't come out of their first 3 picks out of the top 100 of the NFL draft without at least one edge rusher taken off the board. So they've got 47, they've got 97. So mid-second, end of the third, almost right at the end of the third. Who are 2 guys that maybe Commanders fans should know about there in those ranges? So
Will McDonald and Keon White would be 2 good ones there. I mean, and those 2 guys could be fringe first round guys, but if they start falling, and that's, that's the eye of the beholder. Like McDonald is a weirdly shaped guy a little bit. Like he's smaller. And then Keon doesn't have a ton of he still needs some time to grow. But if you get those guys on a deal, you get them a little lower. Or if you're Washington, you can move around a little bit, find them at the end of the first. Like those would be really interesting ads because they would be immediate pass rush help right away. Like they're not going to mess around with. You got to teach them other stuff, but all the stuff that you've been lacking because you've been frustrated with Chase, like you're going to get that from those guys.
Nice. So Keon White out of Georgia Tech. So I was at the Senior Bowl, and Senior Bowl's end of January. There's been a long time since then, and there were some people kind of talking, and we're all kind of in a group together. So you people talk. Some people weren't all that impressed, I guess, by what they expected versus what they saw. Right. Where do you stand on that conversation?
He's really interesting because if I remember right at the Senior Bowl, he was the fastest or one of the fastest linemen when they did the miles per hour stuff, the zebra technology. So and I think Daniel Jeremiah maybe that week put him in his top 10 or something crazy. And I think people got a little what's happening? Yeah. But the thing with him is he's raw. He's a raw guy who he's not, the one-on-one stuff was really not going to be his shining area, and he's one where I don't buy if I think he's going to go in the first round. Maybe, but the traits are really good. He's a very explosive athlete. And he runs, and some of the speed times I think are just kind of superhuman for his size. So that's the difference there is you're just buying on the potential. And if you don't have to guarantee it or whatever, then, okay, now we're talking.
More with Nick Baumgardner from The Athletic coming up here on today's episode of Locked On Commanders. We're also doing this episode thanks to our friends at Built Bar. If you're looking for a delicious snack, but you don't want all the sugar and the calories, and you need the best tasting protein bar ever built, you got to try this. Built Bars are healthy and taste amazing. They taste so amazing, you're not even going to realize that it's actually good for you because they're covered in 100% real dark chocolate, and they come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and cookies and cream. These bars taste like candy bars, but pack amazing macros with only 130 calories, just 4 grams of sugar, but they pack 17 grams of protein. You can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club, and you can get your specialty flavors at Built.com. Head to Walmart today, go to your pharmacy aisle and pick up a 4-bar box of the cookies and cream bar, double chocolate bar, or the coconut puff. If you're close to a Sam's Club, run in and grab 13 bars of our hit flavors, brownie batter puff and churro puff. And make sure, of course, you head to Built.com to check out the new peanut butter puff and cookies and cream puff while supplies last. That's Built.com, built different. You gotta try this. Nick Baumgardner on Twitter at Nick Baumgardner, senior writer at The Athletic. Just one more person I'm super jealous of gets to just use their name as their Twitter handle. I've got to add numbers, and I've had underscores in there before and everything else. Too many David Harrisons in the world. Obviously, the Commanders aren't just going to target edge, so we do need to look at some other areas. And Nick, I actually want to get your opinion on a position group that I will admit to my listeners and viewers that I've probably neglected more than I should have. and that's off-ball linebacker. Specifically, we're looking at the Mike. If Washington is going to draft a future starter to man the middle of the field behind their odd front defense, who do you think that might be?
Drew Sanders is the guy that is probably at the top of that list, I would say, at this point. And he's one that's like really interesting because he's a big framed linebacker who I think can move and cover some ground, but he's also sort of like, he's still kind of raw. He was an Alabama kid that transferred, didn't get on the field there, got lost in the shuffle, transfers, goes to Arkansas, and then blows up in 1 year. So it's like he and Trent Simpson, the kid from Clemson, are very similar. They're both freaky athletes who really have a lot of work to do. The one guy, though, that I think is going to get, I think he's going to get pumped up and pushed up a little higher than he probably should, is Jack Campbell from Iowa, who is a really good athlete. He's not like a phenomenal athlete when you compare him to the other two guys, but he's super smart. Anybody who plays through that system on defense, not offense, but survives what they do out there, knows what they're doing. And he was really the heart of it. So I look at Campbell in the second round there, and I've even heard people whisper that maybe he could go in the late first, somewhere in there. So that's a guy that I always keep an eye on for linebacker teams.
Yeah, I've seen some projections there as well, and I know there's been plenty of my listeners and viewers who they're Jack Campbell guys. So let me ask you this though: the Commanders fans loved Cole Holcomb, and obviously he ends up with an injury last year. He ends up signing as a free agent with the Pittsburgh Steelers. They brought in Cody Barton. Who, if it's those three, great. If it's a later guy, but who is the most Cole Holcomb like linebacker that you could, if you, I don't know how you feel about player comps. I know some people just cringe at player comps, and I get that. But who's kind of the Cole Holcomb in this class if you had to nail one down?
Are we talking like, can you be more specific in terms of like, are we talking like attitude? Or are we talking like,
a little bit of the attitude, just because he doesn't have to be a hunter necessarily. I don't know how much you know about these guys' personal lives, but like,
right. But I mean,
that guy who's
like a guy that I can't stop thinking about. I don't know if it's exact, right? But like there's two linebackers that are going to go later. Dan Henley from Washington State and Ivan Pace is the guy that from Cincinnati that I at the Senior Bowl especially was one, and I was sitting there with Dane Brugler during this one, and he kept asking me, what about this? What about this? And I'm like, well, there's really not anything he does bad. Everything he does is pretty good. He's a solid all-around prospect who's a really good, tough football player who played for a tough football coach at Cincinnati with good players. He played with Sauce. He played with the kid that went to Seattle, Kobe Bryant. That's a guy that I look at and I say he's going to go later because he's small and he's undersized and he's whatever. But linebacker in general is a spot where if you really know what you're doing and you're looking for, you can get those guys on deal after deal, late, fifth, sixth round sometimes. So Ivan is the guy I think of in that vein the most, I think, right now.
Yeah, I mean, just from what you just said right there, nailed it. A little bit undersized, but willing to do the dirty work and does it well. I mean, absolutely. And then Ivan Pace is actually a guy that I've talked about on the program. So I haven't completely neglected the off-ball linebacker position.
You can't ignore Ivan Pace, right? You have to.
Yeah, absolutely. A position group that has certainly not been neglected by anybody the Commanders beat is cornerback, right? And the question really for all of us has been, does the team need a nickel, or do they need an outside guy and then push either Kendall Fuller or Benjamin St-Juste back inside? I'm in the camp that Benjamin St-Juste needs to stay outside. I think most of us on the beat kind of agree there. Kendall Fuller is an interesting veteran evaluation, but we've talked about Joey Porter Jr., Christian Gonzalez, Devin Weatherspoon, obviously even Deontay Banks, Emmanuel Forbes, but who's kind of the best of the day two group in your eyes that could fit either that outside, more zone heavy type of corner scheme or be a good solid nickel?
I'm curious to see where Ringo goes, of course, with all the talent that he has, and we'll see where he slides and falls. And that's obviously an eye of the beholder, right? You got to take the flaws with the good. I think Forbes is still going to be there at the top of day two. He's a really solid player, even though he's a little smallish. And the one guy, another Senior Bowl guy, other than DJ Turner, who's a burner, Darius Rush from South Carolina. I really like that guy. I mean, I think he's got terrific length. He knows what he's doing with it. He's fast enough, and I thought he was savvy enough to be able to move around and play some different spots. I really liked him. I'm not sure sort of where he falls. I've seen some people think he's maybe third round. Some people think he's in the second, but I love those South Carolina guys. There's been a lot of them in recent years, and in this draft too, Zach Pickens, he's a defensive lineman. Those guys that played together all have the same attitude, and I really think Rush, I think, fits into that group.
Absolutely. And then I want to ask you a Michigan question. So Commanders fans, I don't know how many fan bases out there, but the Commanders fan base is definitely one of them, wants to see a kicker drafted in this year's class. They want competition for Joey Slye. Bottom line, that's really what they want. what's your outlook on Wolverines kicker Jake Moody? Is he someone that you think Ron Rivera should tag to come in and be that camp competitor for Joey Sly?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jake Moody is, living here, I've followed Jim Harbaugh's career pretty closely, and he's been coaching for a long time. And that I'm including guys like David Akers and stuff like this. And
Yeah.
this, I don't know too many guys that he would have put in positions that he put him in last year. Like the trust level that he had in Jake Moody is as high as I think a coach can have, and I think that speaks to the context of him. Like, and I think that he is worth the day 3 pick, whatever it is. Because I think he's like a professional athlete. I told somebody actually just today talking about him, like, I don't really know how else to say it other than he kicks like a football player. So many times we hear these kickers talk about like, it's a golf swing. It's like a golf swing. You do not hear Jake Moody talk about kicking like he's golfing. He's a part of a football team. Linemen like him. I think he's a competitive kid. He was a former walk-on, all this, right? So I like him a lot. I think that the bust rate for kickers obviously is notable, but if you're going to draft one, I always say draft one that the linemen kind of respect, and I think that's him.
That's a good one. I think I saw a clip of you. I don't know if it was your podcast or if you were a guest on a podcast, but you're telling a story about an opposing coach that tried to
Yes.
It was a lot. Can you tell that story? Because I'm going to mess it up. I don't want to repeat it.
Absolutely. So Jake Moody, I think when he was a junior, so this was a year before, 2021. So Michigan State are playing, and that's obviously the huge in-state rival. And it was a big game. I think both teams were undefeated. Kenneth Walker was a superstar there at the time, Aiden Hutchinson. And right before halftime, Michigan State had all 3 timeouts. Michigan's trying to kick a field goal, right, like 1 second left, whatever. And Mel Tucker iced him 3 straight times, and he kicked and he made all of them. He hit all of them, and he ended up kicking the one through and kind of looked over at Tucker, who looked back at him and was like, hey, hat tip, buddy. Like, that was pretty damn impressive. And like, that is Jake Moody, like he just doesn't get phased. I think that's why that's the difference. And a guy like that, if you can find a kicker like that who has that attitude and that mentality that just attacks it, like, I think that's kind of worth it sometimes.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I thought when I heard you say that story, I was like,
sure.
Commanders fans are going to love that story. They need to hear that story. So I appreciate you sharing that. Last question here. I got a question from one of my viewers that I passed on to Ben Standig, also The Athletic, there with you guys. And I got his answer. I want to get your answer from a draft expert kind of point of view. J.D. McKissick is a running back that unfortunately suffered multiple neck injuries, and I don't know. Hopefully his personal health is good. I don't know what his career health is going to look like. But if the Commanders decide to go kind of replace that smaller, more pass catching, kind of a 50-50 split. He had some touches, but catches is kind of what he's known for there. Obviously, not much of a pass protector. Is there a guy that you can kind of say is that J.D. McKissick replacement, or even maybe a slight upgrade?
There's a couple, really. I mean, this is a good running back draft. This is a good draft to need a back, I think, because like Eric Gray is the example that immediately came to my head when you were talking there, because he is a really shifty, quick, not a great protector, not big. He's small, but he's a really good player. And I think he's going to be there on like day 3. I think in any other year, he'd be gone like in the 2nd or 3rd round. But I think this is a year where there's so many good backs, like a Tyjae Spears. He's a 2nd or 3rd round pick for sure, like that are 3 down type. They'll be candidates for that role. Whereas a guy like Eric Gray, I think could be a terrific complimentary guy, and you could maybe get a steal out of him, later in the draft. Another guy that gets the kid from Kansas State, Deuce Vaughn, who's he's too small, he's too short, right? But he's a really tough, good, dependable football player who I think is probably there for somebody on day 3 if they want him.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that because I also host a Locked On Bucks podcast. We've had some Bucks fans mock Deuce Vaughn to the Buccaneers. And I have said on my show, like, no, he's too small. He can't pick up blitzes. He can't do any of this stuff.
Yeah.
And, you're the second draft expert that without that context has basically told me I'm wrong. So I got
a tough kid. He's a tough kid.
Yeah,
that's a tough team. Yeah. If you're looking at the K-State guys, they were a tough group, but I wouldn't doubt him. It's a valid concern. He is very small, very small. Gray I would like him more, but yes, it's a valid concern, but he's a tough kid.
Yeah, I think you need to give him another look. I mean, bottom line, if he ends up on the team, he's going to get a clear look from the coaches, not me. It doesn't really matter what my opinion is. Nick Baumgardner, senior writer for The Athletic, at Nick Baumgardner on Twitter. Nick, I appreciate your time. Thanks for coming through.
Absolutely, David. Anytime.
One more time, tons of thanks to Nick Baumgardner from The Athletic for coming through here on today's episode of Locked On Commanders. And of course, I want to thank you all for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or your first view every single day. For my everydayers, I will be recording our next full episode at the conclusion of day 1 of the NFL draft. So we'll have the pick. The first round will end. We'll sit down with Ron Rivera, Martin Mayhew out there in Ashburn. We'll pick their brains as much as we can about what happened. And then I will sit down and record a full episode that will be going up on all platforms as soon as it's ready. So as soon as it's ready for audio, it's going to go out. As soon as it's ready on YouTube, it'll go out as well. So make sure you've got auto downloads turned on. Make sure you've got notifications turned on so you know when all that stuff is dropping. And throughout the night, throughout Thursday night, Friday night, and Saturday, especially Saturday, I'm going to be doing some stuff via Subtext. I've got some exclusive video ideas kind of going through my mind, some tech stuff that we're going to do. So if you want to get in on all that fun, just text hashtag HTTC to 202-760-2644. The first 2 weeks are free, so you're going to get all of draft weekend completely free to test drive this new platform with me. It's been a lot of fun. And again, growing on a daily basis now. So I greatly appreciate all of you who have decided to take that ride with me as well. As the draft is going on, if you want to influence that conversation following each day, drop your questions, your comments in email form at lockedoncommanders@gmail.com, on Twitter at dharrison82, in the YouTube comments, or text me anytime at 202-760-2644, again, via Subtext. For you Twitter folks, at dharrison82 is where you want to get a hold of me the best. The Locked On Commanders Twitter page is active, but it is a network page. dharrison82 is my page. So that is the best place to get a hold of me directly. I do check the Commanders Twitter page as often as I possibly can, but dharrison82 is the best spot to go. Signing off for today, I'm David Harris, the staff writer for Commander Country of Sports Illustrated's FanNation, credential member of the media covering Washington Commanders, and more importantly, hanging out with you 5 days a week, most weeks. This week, hanging out with you a lot more. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe, be kind to one another, and I'll see you next time right back here for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.